The sun was setting over the quiet suburb of Nairobi, painting the sky a dull orange as Amara stood by her father's coffin. Her chest felt heavy, her eyes swollen from crying. People came and went, offering empty words of comfort, but none of it reached her. Her father, the man who had built everything from nothing, was gone. Beside her stood Beatrice, her stepmother, dressed in black from head to toe, crying louder than anyone else. But when their eyes met, Amara saw something behind those tears, a cold satisfaction she couldn't ignore. When the last mourner left and the house grew quiet, Beatrice's tone changed. She gathered everyone still around and said sharply, "From now on, everything belongs to me. The house, the business, the land. It's all in my name." Amara froze. "That can't be," she whispered. Her father had promised her that she would be taken care of. Beatrice smiled tightly and waved a document in her hand, a will signed and sealed. "Your father made sure of it," she said. That night, Amara sat alone in the living room, the air still thick with incense from the funeral. The same couch where her father once watched the news now felt cold and strained. She looked around at the photos on the wall, her father's smile, the life they once shared, and felt them slipping away. Everything she had known was gone. Even her father's memory didn't feel safe anymore. A week after the funeral, everything changed. Beatrice wasted no time showing her true colors. One morning, Amara came home from running errands to find her suitcase, clothes, and books thrown out onto the wet ground. The gate was locked. Beatrice stood by the door, arms crossed, a cold smirk on her face. "You don't live here anymore," she said flatly. Amara's chest tightened. "This is my father's house," she whispered, her voice trembling. Beatrice just shrugged. "It was your father's. Now it's mine." The workers who once greeted Amara with smiles now looked away. Beatrice had already fired the old staff and replaced them with strangers. The neighbors peeked through their windows, whispering among themselves, but no one came out to help. In their eyes, it was family business, not their place to interfere. Amara felt humiliation burn through her as she packed what little she could carry. Her half-brother, Eli, ran out crying. "Mama, please don't make her go," he begged, tugging at Beatrice's sleeve. But Beatrice pushed him aside. "Go back inside, Eli. She's not our problem anymore." His voice cracked as he shouted after Amara, but she couldn't turn back. The gate closed behind her with a loud clang that echoed in her chest. With nowhere to go, Amara took a bus across the city, her small bag clutched to her chest. She found a tiny hostel on the edge of Nairobi, a cheap place where the walls were thin and the lights flickered. The room smelled of damp clothes and old paint, but it was all she could afford. She spent her first night staring at the ceiling, too tired to cry, too heartbroken to sleep. The next morning, she started looking for work. She took a cleaning job at a small cafe during the day and helped at a night kiosk nearby. It wasn't much, but it paid for her bed and one meal a day. Her hands ached, her feet blistered, but she kept going. Every night before sleeping, she held on to the only thing she had left from her father, his old wristwatch. The leather strap was worn, the glass scratched, but it still ticked softly, steady and strong. Sometimes she'd whisper into the dark, "Papa, if you can hear me, please show me the truth." The words became her prayer, her way of holding on. People passed her by every day, no one knowing her story, no one seeing the weight she carried. But inside her, something quiet was growing, a small spark of strength she didn't yet understand. She had lost everything, but she wasn't broken. Not yet. Months passed, and life became a blur of work and exhaustion for Amara. Every day was the same, cleaning tables at the cafe in the morning, serving customers with a tired smile, then rushing to her second job at the night kiosk. The noise of the city never stopped, but inside, she felt quiet and empty. Sometimes she'd catch her reflection in a window and barely recognize herself. The bright, confident girl she once was had turned into someone just trying to survive. One slow evening at the cafe, as she wiped down the counter, a familiar voice called her name. "Amara?" She looked up and froze. Standing there was Uncle Kamau, one of her late father's oldest friends. His hair had gone grayer, but his kind eyes were the same. "My child," he said softly, "I've been looking for you." Amara felt her throat tighten. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with warmth. She quickly led him to a corner table. They talked quietly over cups of tea. Kamau told her how much her father had loved her, how proud he had been of the woman she was becoming. Then his tone changed. "Before your father married Beatrice," he said, leaning closer, "he told me something. He said, if anything happens to me, Amara must get everything I worked for." Amara's heart started pounding. "But Beatrice has the will. She owns everything," she said. Kamau shook his head slowly. "I don't believe that's the will your father wanted. He mentioned writing another one, a second will, and keeping it somewhere safe. Somewhere only someone who truly knew him could find." The words hit her like lightning. For months, she had lived believing everything was lost, that her father's promises had meant nothing. Now, for the first time, she felt a spark of hope. Her father had always been careful, always thinking ahead. Could he really have left behind another will? Did he tell you where he kept it? She asked, her voice trembling. Kamau sighed. No, child. He only said, if something ever happens to me, Amara will know where to look. That night, Amara walked back to her small hostel with her heart racing. The city lights blurred through her tears, but she didn't care. For the first time in months, she felt alive. She sat on her bed, holding her father's old watch in her hand, the ticking suddenly sounding louder, stronger, almost as if it were trying to tell her something. She whispered into the darkness, Papa, if you left me a sign, I'll find it. Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and looked out the small window toward the city that had swallowed her whole. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was going to fight for the truth, no matter what it took. The rain had been falling since morning, turning the streets into shallow rivers. Amara came home drenched and tired after another long day at work. Her shoes squished with every step as she climbed the narrow staircase to her small hostel room. She just wanted to change into dry clothes and rest. But as she reached her door, she froze. Someone was knocking. A soft, steady knock that didn't sound impatient or threatening, just certain. She hesitated before opening. When she did, she found a tall man standing in the dim hallway, rain dripping from his coat. He looked to be in his early 30s, serious but kind, the kind of face that seemed to carry both confidence and sadness. Amara, he asked gently. She nodded slowly, confused. Who are you? He took a step back, wiping his wet glasses. My name is Cato, he said. I'm a lawyer. I used to work with your father. The words made Amara's heart skip. My father, she whispered. No one had spoken his name in months. Yes, Cato said softly. I've been searching for you for a long time. Before she could speak, he reached into his coat and pulled out a brown envelope, old, worn, and sealed with a faded red stamp. Across the front was her father's signature, bold and unmistakable. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Cato looked at her carefully and said, This is your father's real will. For a moment, she couldn't move. The hallway seemed to spin around her. She stared at the envelope, her father's handwriting staring back at her like a voice from the past. I don't understand, she whispered. Beatrice already has the will. She took everything. Cato shook his head. That document was forged. Your father came to me months before he died. He told me he suspected something, that Beatrice might try to control his estate if anything happened to him. So he wrote this will by hand, had it notarized, and told me to keep it safe until I found you. Amara's hands trembled as she reached for the envelope, but she stopped halfway. Why now? Why did it take you so long? She asked. His eyes softened. After your father passed, everything moved quickly. Beatrice covered her tracks well. She even tried to shut down all his legal contacts. It took me months to trace you. She finally took the envelope, holding it like it was made of glass. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it. Inside, Cato said quietly, is the truth your father wanted you to have. Amara closed the door behind them, the sound of the rain fading as she sat down on her small bed. She ran her fingers over the familiar handwriting, tears filling her eye. For months, she had prayed for a sign, something to prove her father hadn't abandoned her. And now it was right there in her hands. Amara sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling as Cato carefully placed the brown envelope between them. The rain outside had slowed to a quiet drizzle, and the room felt heavy with silence. Cato took a deep breath before breaking the seal. The sound of the tearing paper made Amara's heart rate. Inside was a single folded document, slightly yellowed with age but still neat and clear. At the bottom of the first page was her father's familiar signature, bold and steady, just like she remembered. Cato unfolded the pages slowly and began to read. This is a handwritten will, he explained. It's dated 3 months before your father passed away, and it's properly notarized. It's authentic. He cleared his throat and continued reading aloud. I, Joseph Mwangi, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare that all my property, land, and business holdings shall belong to my daughter, Amara Mwangi, and my son, Eli Mwangi. My wife, Beatrice, shall receive a modest monthly allowance to ensure her well-being. Amara's eyes widened. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Her father's words, his true words, were right there in front of her. Everything she had lost, everything Beatrice had stolen, suddenly made sense. Her chest tightened as tears began to fall, one after another. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying not to sob. He didn't forget me, she whispered. He kept his promise. Cato watched her quietly, his expression calm but serious. Your father knew this might happen, he said. He told me that if Beatrice ever found the chance, she would twist the law in her favor. That's why he made sure this will existed. But Amara, he paused, meeting her eyes, you need to understand something. Beatrice won't give up easily. Once we bring this forward, she'll fight, hard. She has money, lawyers, and connections. Amara wiped her tears and looked at him with a steady gaze. Let her fight, she said softly. I have the truth now. She picked up her father's old wristwatch from the table, the one thing that had kept her going all these months. The small clock ticked quietly, steady and sure, like a heartbeat. She held it tightly in her palm and whispered, "Papa, I'll fight too." Cato nodded, impressed by her strength. "Then we'll do this together," he said. He carefully folded the will back into its envelope and tucked it into his briefcase. "Tomorrow, we start the legal process. The truth will come to light." As he stood to leave, Amara glanced toward the small window where the rain had stopped and a faint light was breaking through the clouds. For the first time in months, she felt something deep in her chest, not just hope but power. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, calm and steady, "Stand tall, my daughter." And she knew she finally would. The sun was blazing that morning when Amara and Cato stood outside the gates of her father's old home, the same gate that had slammed shut behind her months ago. Amara's palms were sweaty, her heart pounding, but her eyes were steady. She wasn't the broken girl who'd been thrown out anymore. She was here for the truth. Cato gave her a reassuring nod before pressing the doorbell. Moments later, the gate opened and there stood Beatrice, dressed in a silk robe, her expression turning sour the moment she saw Amara. "Well, well," Beatrice said with a mocking smile. "Look who decided to crawl back." Amara didn't respond. She walked past her stepmother and into the house, her father's scent faint but still there, a mix of wood polish and old books. Memories rushed back, but she held her ground. Beatrice followed behind, scoffing. "What do you want, Amara? Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough?" Cato stepped forward, placing a folder on the table. "Mrs. Mwangi," he said firmly, "we're here regarding the estate of the late Joseph Mwangi." Beatrice laughed loudly. "Oh, please. I already settled that. The property is mine." Amara calmly opened the folder and placed a sealed document in front of her, her father's real will. "You might want to read this," she said quietly. Beatrice rolled her eyes and leaned forward, but when her gaze landed on the signature and the official stamps, her smile began to fade. She picked up the papers with shaking hands, flipping through them quickly. Her face went pale. This can't be real," she stammered. "It's very real," Cato replied. "It's dated 3 months before your husband's death, and it's legally notarized. We've already filed it with the registrar's office." For the first time, Beatrice's voice trembled. "You don't know what you're talking about." "My lawyer." "Your lawyer," Cato interrupted, "already admitted to being manipulated into drafting a fake will after your husband's death. We have his signed statement." Beatrice's face twisted in anger. "You can't do this to me," she shouted, slamming her fist on the table. "This house is mine. Everything he built belongs to me." Amara stood still, her voice calm but firm. "No, Beatrice. It belongs to the people he loved, to me and Eli. You stole from us, and now the truth is out." Within hours, the house filled with commotion. Lawyers, court officials, and local authorities arrived to verify the documents. The truth unraveled fast, each detail hitting Beatrice like a storm she couldn't control. Her lies, her greed, all of it laid bare in front of witnesses. As the officials sealed the fake documents as evidence, Amara stood quietly, watching Beatrice's power crumble. Beatrice's voice cracked as she pleaded, "Please, Amara, you don't understand." But Amara did understand, finally. She looked at her father's portrait on the wall and whispered, "You can rest now, Papa. The truth has found its way home." The courtroom was packed that morning. Journalists, neighbors, and even distant relatives had shown up to see how the story would end. Amara sat quietly beside Cato, her hands clasped together, her father's watch on her wrist ticking softly, a reminder to stay strong. Across the room, Beatrice sat stiffly with her new lawyer, her face painted with forced confidence. But there was fear in her eyes. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The hearing began, and Beatrice's lawyer immediately tried to argue that the handwritten will was fake. "There's no proof Mr. Mwangi wrote it himself," he said. But Cato stood calmly and presented the evidence. The notarized seal, the handwriting verification, and the date that clearly showed the will was made months before her husband's death. Every fact lined up perfectly. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The old lawyer, the one Beatrice had secretly convinced to create the fake will, was called to the stand. His hands shook as he took the oath. "Tell the court the truth," the judge said firmly. The man hesitated, his eyes darting toward Beatrice, who stared back at him with quiet panic. Finally, his voice cracked as he confessed. "Yes, she made me do it," he said. "She came to me after her husband's death and demanded a new will that would give her everything. I knew it was wrong, but she threatened me." Gasps filled the courtroom. Beatrice's lawyer tried to object, but it was too late. The truth was out. Beatrice stood up suddenly, shouting, "He's lying. They're all lying." But her words only made the room colder. The judge watched her quietly, then turned to the evidence one last time. After a long pause, the judge's voice broke the silence. "The court finds that the handwritten will presented by Amara Mwangi is valid and legally binding." The property, land, and business shall be returned to the rightful heirs, Amara and Eli Mwangi. He looked directly at Beatrice. You are ordered to vacate the property immediately and repay all funds you withdrew unlawfully from the family estate. Beatrice sank into her chair, speechless. Her face turned pale, her hands clutching her handbag like it was all she had left. The gavel came down with a sharp bang, sealing the verdict. Amara sat still, tears filling her eyes. Cato placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. It's over, he whispered. She nodded slowly, but her heart felt heavy. There was relief, yes, justice had finally been served, but there was no joy in it. Her father's name had been dragged through lies, and even though the truth had won, the scars would remain. As she walked out of the courtroom into the bright Nairobi sunlight, she looked up at the sky and whispered, "We did it, Papa." For the first time, the weight on her chest began to lift. It wasn't victory she felt, it was peace. Quiet, steady peace. The gates creaked open slowly as Amara stepped inside the compound that had once been her home. The afternoon sun bathed everything in a warm glow, revealing dust-covered windows and overgrown grass. The house stood quietly, tired but still beautiful, just as she remembered it. Her chest tightened. For months, she had dreamed of this moment, walking through that gate not as a stranger, but as the rightful owner of her father's home. Before she could take another step, a familiar voice called out, "Amara." She turned just in time to see Eli running toward her. He was taller now, his school uniform slightly too big, but his eyes, bright and full of hope, were exactly the same. He threw his arms around her, hugging her tightly. "You came back," he said, his voice breaking. Amara held him close, tears filling her eyes. "I told you I would," she whispered. "This is our home again." They walked through the house together, each room stirring old memories. In the living room, Amara brushed her hand along the furniture, still covered in white sheets. "Remember when Papa used to sit here and tell us stories after dinner?" she asked softly. Eli smiled through his tears. He'd always fall asleep halfway. They both laughed, their voices echoing through the quiet halls. In her father's study, the air still carried his scent, a mix of coffee, old paper, and cologne. His books were still on the shelves, his chair pushed neatly under the desk as if he'd just stepped out for a moment. Amara ran her fingers along the edge of the table and whispered, "I'll take care of everything, Papa. I promise." Over the next few days, she and Eli began cleaning, opening windows, and letting the light in. Dust floated in the air like tiny memories. The neighbors, who had once stayed silent, now came to visit. They brought gifts, flowers, and warm smiles. "We're proud of you, Amara," one of them said. "You fought for what was right." She thanked them politely, but inside, she knew this wasn't just about winning. It was about rebuilding what her father had left behind. Standing outside the old family business, she could almost hear her father's voice. "Never give up on what you've built." The sign above the entrance was faded, but the dream behind it was still alive. "I'm going to restore this place," she told Eli, "and I'll make it even stronger than before." He grinned. Papa would like that. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Amara stood by the window, feeling the breeze sweep through the open house. It carried the soft scent of rain and something else, something familiar, almost like her father's presence. She smiled, clutching his old wristwatch on her wrist. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel lost. She felt home. Months passed, and life slowly settled into rhythm again. Amara had rebuilt her father's business from the ground up. The small office buzzed with life, employees chatting, phones ringing, papers shuffling. Every corner of the place reminded her of her father's values: hard work, honesty, and kindness. She had renamed it Mwangi and Company, keeping his legacy alive. The pain of the past was fading, replaced by a quiet sense of pride. One rainy afternoon, as Amara reviewed files in her office, there was a soft knock on the door. "Come in," she said, not looking up. When the door creaked open, she froze. Standing there, soaked and frail, was Beatrice. Her once perfect hair was now messy, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes red from crying. For a moment, Amara couldn't speak. She had imagined this meeting 100 times, but not like this. Beatrice's voice trembled. "Amara, please, I needed to see you." She stepped forward slowly, clutching her handbag. "I lost everything," she said. "The house, the car, the money, it's all gone. I don't even have a place to sleep tonight." Amara stayed silent, her hands resting on the desk. She studied the woman who had once thrown her out without mercy. The arrogance was gone, replaced by regret and exhaustion. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "I know I was cruel," she whispered. "I was angry, and I thought I could control everything. But I was wrong. Please forgive me." The room was quiet except for the sound of rain tapping against the window. Amara took a slow breath before speaking. "You took what wasn't yours," she said softly. "Not just the house or the money. You took peace, you took trust. You broke what my father tried to keep whole. And now, you finally know how it feels to lose it." Beatrice lowered her head, crying quietly. For a moment, Amara just watched her. The woman who had caused so much pain now looked small and fragile. Then, she reached into her drawer and pulled out a small envelope. She placed it gently on the table. "This is for you," she said. Beatrice looked up, confused. "What is it?" "A monthly allowance," Amara replied. "It's what my father wrote in his real will. You were meant to receive it. I'm just honoring his wishes." Beatrice stared at her, shocked. "After everything I did, you're still helping me?" Amara nodded quietly. "Because I won't be like you. You took out of greed. I give out of love for him." Tears streamed down Beatrice's face as she took the envelope with shaking hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Amara stood and looked out the window, watching the rain fall over the city. Her father had always said forgiveness was strength, not weakness. In that moment, she finally understood. The past couldn't be changed, but she could choose who she became because of it, and she chose grace. The evening sun dipped low over Nairobi, washing the garden in a soft golden light. Amara stood where her father used to plant his favorite flowers, the same spot where he had once taught her how to take care of them. The air was warm, filled with the scent of fresh soil and blooming jasmine. In her hand, she held his old wristwatch, the one she had carried through every hardship. It still ticked steadily, like his heartbeat, as if reminding her that he was still with her somehow. Across the yard, Eli laughed as he kicked a ball around, his joy echoing through the quiet evening. Amara smiled, her eyes glistening. She whispered softly, "You kept your promise, Papa. You never left me." The words carried into the breeze, and for a moment, she swore she could feel his presence, gentle, comforting, proud. Just then, a soft knock came from the gate. Amara turned to see Cato standing there, a folder tucked under his arm and that familiar calm smile on his face. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. She shook her head and waved him in. "Never." He handed her the folder. "These are the final documents for your new business registration," he said. "All that's missing is the name." Amara looked down at the papers, then back at the garden that held so many memories. After a quiet pause, she smiled. "Kamau Holdings," she said. "After the man who reminded me to stand tall when life tried to break me." Cato nodded approvingly. The last rays of sunlight touched her face as her voice echoed softly in her heart. "They tried to bury me under lies, but my father's truth found its way back home. Because in the end, you can steal wealth, but you can't steal legacy. The truth always finds its way."